The martyr child has reached his goal and reaped the fruits of his sacrifice.
Gaza, the atmosphere is filled with despair, an absence of hope, and death. Photographs of men and young boys who committed suicide bombings are plastered everywhere. But now there is something different. Photographs of the 4 women who strapped on explosive belts and blew themselves up are also prominently displayed. When I asked a woman in Gaza why women were now accepted as fighters alongside the men, her response was chilling.
فإحنا في حالة يعني انتهاك.
The Israeli occupation has made us victims of a flagrant violation of our freedom and our rights. We must defend ourselves by whatever means we can. That is our legitimate duty. Either we strap on a belt of explosives and carry out suicide missions, or we defend ourselves by any other means possible.
Beginning in 1994, the atmosphere throughout the occupied territories becomes more and more violent. The influence of the 2 extremist groups, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, take over the streets and silence the voices of moderation within the Palestinian population. Yasser Arafat, under pressure from the United States to control the violence, finds himself with enemies on 2 fronts: the Hamas and Islamic Jihad, who are bent on removing him from power, and Israel, who is determined to diminish him in the eyes of his own people. After a spate of suicide bombings throughout the occupied territories and within the Jewish state, public opinion in Israel is hostile to any peace accord. On October 14, 1995, Benjamin Netanyahu, the right-wing candidate for prime minister, holds an election rally in Tel Aviv. Netanyahu rallies the crowd. Yitzhak Rabin, the architect of the peace process, is perceived as a traitor. The crowd calls for his death. 3 weeks later, Rabin is assassinated by an Israeli right-wing extremist. His death marks the beginning of the end of any hope for peace. Rabin's death has repercussions as well for Yasser Arafat. Palestinian opinion on the street has shifted toward the extremists. Suicide bombers are revered as heroes, and Arafat is losing support and popularity. Torn between keeping his word to the United States and saving face with his people, Arafat mobilizes new troops. In the morning of January 27, 2002, several hundred women are invited to his headquarters in Ramallah.
هذه المرأة الفلسطينية حامية بقائنا وحارسة نارنا الدائمة التي حمت هذا الوجود الفلسطيني مشعب الجبارين، فكانت القائدة الصلبة والقوية والأمينة لشعب الجبارين، لشعب الجبارين. نبيك يا وطن بالروح بالدم، نبيك يا فلسطين بالروح بالدم، نبيك يا فلسطين بالروح بالدم، نبيك يا فلسطين.
That same afternoon, Wafa Idris, a 26-year-old Palestinian woman, blows herself up in Jerusalem. Coincidence or a deliberate political act? In the beginning, even Arafat and his supporters are reluctant to claim responsibility for the attack, but when there is an overwhelming positive reaction, the Fatah, Arafat's organization, claims Wafa Idris as their own. During a visit to Wafa Idris's mother in her home in the El Amari refugee camp in Ramallah, on the surface, she seems proud of her daughter.
We're proud she gave her life for her homeland, for Palestine. We knew nothing about it. She'd spoken to no one. My daughter saw too much violence and tragedy when she was working for the Red Crescent. She saw what the Jews had done to us. She was offered money, but she refused. She worked voluntarily for the Red Crescent. The brothers would say to her, "And what's more, you're working for nothing." And she'd reply, "I'm doing it for our homeland of Palestine."
Hours after Wafa's death, in the El Amari refugee camp near Ramallah, there's an atmosphere of joy, a wedding with eternity, as children and adults throw candy in the air in celebration of Wafa's death.
You die for God, so you give your life back to the owner, which is God. And that is highly glorified. It brings you to the status of almost a prophet. That is the shaheed.
She was married, but her baby was stillborn. Her husband's family forced him to divorce Wafa because they wanted children.
A tainted woman because of her divorce, no job or money, Wafa Idris became a burden on her family.
Well, I believe that women doing this is an exception to the rule. Because women basically are the source of life. Like one of them could be depressed. One of them could have had a problem. But that's because they are the exception to the rule.
After 20 years of Israeli occupation, the Palestinian population rises up in protest. December 11th, 1987, the first Intifada begins. For the first time, the role of women changes. They are no longer considered the womb of the nation, but fighters alongside their men.
In general, men, women, children, old men, everybody is living under a very big injustice and harsh measures. In our organization, PFLP, we have raised mottos that men and women are together in the struggle for freedom. And it's not only a motto, but it's also in practice. We put it in practice.
1988, Hamas issues a decree that women are forbidden to venture out in the streets alone. Men are ordered to keep their wives, mothers, daughters, and sisters in the house, far from the conflict. For Palestinian women, this is a step backwards when it comes to their liberation. For the men, it's a welcome rule. It became too painful to watch their women pushed or touched or arrested by Israeli soldiers. The greater tragedy was not that women were forced to resume their traditional role, but that their children, their sons of that first Intifada, were destined to become the suicide bombers of today. Eventually, the concept of jihad, or holy wars, the way to liberate Palestine, became more prevalent. People made heroes of the suicide bombers. As the extremists gathered increasing support in the street, Arafat found he was unable to recruit the men within his ranks to blow themselves up. Eventually, under the guise of equality, he devised a new weapon, one that his extremist opponents were forbidden to use according to the Quran: women.
وفي هذا اليوم وجه تحية عرفان.
اليهود هم اليهود قاتلوهم أينما كنتم حيثما ثقفتموهم.
During an interview in Gaza with Dr. Abdul Rantisi, the number 2 of Hamas, he makes it clear that according to the new interpretation in the Quran, women are allowed to become suicide bombers.
Islam gives chance to women as well as men to struggle. Our mothers believe that their sons, daughters, all of them boiling from inside,
In our community, there's a very big effect of religion, of course, and glorifying martyrdom. We are proud of our martyrs.
From an early age, children throughout the occupied territories in Gaza are schooled in the notion of dying a martyr's death. Beginning in kindergarten, the Quran is taught by a method of repetition. Neither questions nor interpretation are permitted. The irony is that while all schools are under the auspices of the United Nations, children are nonetheless taught that the supreme goal of life is to die a martyr's death. Instead of discouraging this belief, teachers encourage the children to give their lives for Allah and for Palestine.
I call on all the Arab and Islamic presidents to support our Islamic cause, to liberate Jerusalem.
I want to become a martyr, to defend my homeland and give my life for my country.
I'd like to be a martyr because we have duties towards our country. We must return to it what it has given us. It's our obligation to defend it.
I too would like to be a martyr because the martyr may enter the highest level of paradise. I don't believe there will be peace.
I never believe.
Because the state of Israel will never accept peace. Because they are not human beings. They've committed massacres at Jenin, at Naplouse, at Kalkia, and even here at Jabalia. In under 2 hours, there were 20 martyrs. That shows the Israelis have no heart.
I conducted a study in which I collected dreams from 300 Palestinian children. I found 78% of the dreams were about physical violence. And in the vast majority of these dreams, the Palestinians were the victims. 15% of the children were expressed in their dreams that they were coming dead. They were equally boys and girls. I assumed that it would be more boys because we saw until that time that more of the suicide bombers were men.
At 6, death has little meaning. Carrying guns, training in military drills are all play acting. The tragedy is that all too soon they will become reality.
It's obvious that when you see the bloodshed, the horror of the occupation and what we're subjected to, individuals become more and more willing to sacrifice themselves as martyrs. Even my son, when he speaks, says we are all martyrs, that he must follow in his uncle's footsteps and blow himself up like he did. And he's only 4.5. I teach my son to love his homeland and martyrdom, to defend our honor and our religion, so the banner of Islam will fly on high. When God chooses someone, it is because that person is dear to him. Otherwise he wouldn't choose them. I adore my son, but when God chooses him, it will mean he loves him more than I. The sole vocation of Palestinian mothers is to raise their children for martyrdom.
Children learn these principles from early childhood, and they understand the meaning of paradise, of life in the hereafter. They know that this life is one of ordeal, violence, suffering, and grief. On the other hand, eternal life, the life of happiness, is paradise. So all Muslims strive toward paradise.
Shireen Rabaya is 15. She is one of many young girls and women who've tried and failed to blow herself up. Shireen had problems at home and at school. Considered too pretty, too westernized, she was alone and without friends. Vulnerable and unhappy, Shireen was recruited by her own uncle.
On my way home from school, I met a member of my family. You always greet your family members, especially those you haven't seen for a long time. And we spoke about the fact that I should try to blow myself up.
What did your uncle tell you to do?
He spoke of martyrdom and asked me to carry out a mission. They were going to give me a belt of explosives to blow myself up.
But what did you think would happen when you put on an explosive belt and blew yourself up?
That I'd be just bits and pieces in the trash bag before being buried.
But it's finished now. You won't do that again.
No.
Were you really convinced that you would wake up in paradise?
No.
Did you realize that if you did that, you would die and you'd never see your mother or your father or your friends ever again? Did you really believe there was another life after death?
No.
So why were you going to do it?
Because the martyr's place is paradise. The martyr will have 70 wives, but for women, who knows?
It is the Muslim's duty to become a martyr, but for a worthwhile reason, not for nothing. It is every Muslim's duty to sacrifice their life for their country.
وهي اسمها بسملة وهنسألها كمان. السلام عليكم.
السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
اسمك ايه؟
بسملة.
بسملة عندك كام سنة؟
3 سنين ونص.
انت مسلمة؟
اه.
بسملة انت تعرفي اليهود؟
اه.
بتحبيهم؟ لا ما بتحبيهمش ليه؟
كده.
عشان هم ايه؟
هم قردة وخنازير.
عشان هم قردة وخنازير؟ مين قال عليهم كده؟
ربنا.
Imagine a child of 10, when you ask him what would you like to be when you grow up, he said, I want to be a shaheed. It means that he now unconsciously he believes that when he's 20 he's going to die.
We don't like to become martyrs, to free our land, and retaliate for the massacres at Jenin, defend our land together, carry out suicide missions.
We're learning, and we ask the camp leaders to guide us.
We'll stop at nothing.
You want to follow the martyr brigades of Al-Aqsa or Hamas?
The Al-Aqsa Brigade. We want to be like them, heroes.
Now they're too young to become martyrs because the Israeli forces would catch them. But when they grow up, they will be.
During a visit to a Palestinian feminist in Gaza, I asked her what happens to a young girl if she's pregnant without being married.
There's different solutions. One of them to marry her. Another solution is maybe to keep her in the house without, not to let her go out or have complete her education or. Another solution maybe, and this is it's to kill her.
At the age of 21, this young woman, unmarried, discovered that she was pregnant. Her family gave her a choice. Either the male members of her family would kill her, or she would accept a mission. She would accompany a potential martyr to Jerusalem, where he would blow himself up. The young woman chose the most popular area, at the corner of King George and Jaffa Streets. Sbarro Pizzeria, a popular meeting place for Israeli teenagers, is located on one of the 4 corners of the intersection.
had 7 children, we now have 6. In the afternoon they were the 2 girls, our next door neighbour, Michal, one of her closest friends, and Malki were on their way to the other side of town to stop in and have a pizza.
So when the bomb happened, I had CNN on, and I saw it, and I jumped up and started screaming and crying. But then I called her friend's family, and they said they couldn't reach her either. I began to call the hospitals to see whether she was among the injured. So then I started crying, screaming. And once we knew that her friend had been killed, her friend was found in the hospital. She was dead. So then I knew there was no hope. She couldn't take me. I'm taking care of my family. I'm doing what I have to do. But I'm in constant pain. Constant.
6 weeks after the suicide bombing, students at Al-Nadar University in Nablus organize a strange exhibition. Body parts made of papier-mâché and remnants of bloody pizzas, along with photographs of the actual scene of death and destruction after the attack, attract large crowds.
Here was one child with her whole life in front of her, full of cultural values, sympathy for others, and here was another child. Who knows what her background was, but some ugly man sitting in some office, maybe in Ramallah, maybe in Gaza, manipulated and programmed and did everything that he could to make that child a bomb.
We're in Gaza to interview Sheikh Yassin, the spiritual head of Hamas. During the interview, he explains that he has issued a formal decree that there is nothing in the Muslim tradition or in the Quran that prohibits women from martyrdom. How do you feel, Sheikh Yassin, a man of God, when you hear that a woman has gone into a market and killed herself in the name of Allah and killed women and children?
An underlying principle of Muslim society is to combat all forms of aggression and of colonization. This struggle concerns both men and women, and the fact that women agree to fight is rather a good sign.
In my opinion, to be equal, not in death, because everybody is equal in death. But what we are struggling for is to be equal on the same basis during life.
First of all, the most important thing in paradise is satisfaction. That women in paradise are satisfied, all of them satisfied, and everyone they think that he is the master and no one above him. This is the satisfaction which is the most important.
The believing woman martyr, if she is not married on earth, or if she is lacking in womanly qualities, will find herself rewarded once in heaven. If a woman is beautiful, if her soul is pure, if her heart is pure, by becoming a martyr, she will be yet more beautiful when she reaches paradise. And God will shower her with graces.
When women send their children off to die, are they given the same status of martyr as well?
I think just a few mothers who know before the operation that their son or their daughter can do that. Like, for example, Nidal Farahat.
The mother of a young suicide bomber explains the reasons that motivated her to encourage her son to die a martyr's death.
A month before the mission, my son and I began preparing ourselves. I prepared him on a psychological level, not on a material level. He would go out with his comrades to learn how to handle a gun, to shoot, and use grenades. I was behind him all the way, encouraging him. I gave him the moral and psychological strength. I told him, be a man. We talked a lot together, especially about martyrdom. I spoke to him of what God has prepared for martyrs and mujahideens. The wellspring of courage is unique. It will never change. It is even essential. We draw our courage from the strength of our religion. I strongly believe in my religion. It is that which gives me courage. Even our children, our most cherished beings on earth, become of little value before God. We know and believe that there exists another life, the life of eternal happiness, of true happiness. And because I love my son, I offered him this gift, that God might grant him eternal life in paradise.
He was killed at Atmona. He just turned 19. A terrorist entered a boarding school in Atmona where he killed 5 children and wounded 20 others. The terrible thing is, when his parents were asked what they thought, it turned out the mother knew about the mission and had given her son her blessing. When a mother sends her son out to kill other children, I don't see how God can create such a creature. And when a father says, I'm proud of my son, I'd send out 5 or 6 more of my children. Personally, I have no answer to that.
It was at Kosh Katif, between Khan Yunis and Rafah. There's a colony there. My son, Mohammed, entered a part of the colony called Atsmuna, where there's a training school for pilots and arms. A big training school. Upon arriving, he cut the barbed wire and made his way inside. First, he killed 3 guards. Giants. Then he penetrated into the dormitories and started firing.
He wasn't even a suicide bomber. He was just a 19-year-old Arab kid from Gaza who got into the village and fired at anything that moved. In the 15 minutes before the army arrived, he had enough time to commit slaughter.
We were all gathered around the television, watching the news, surrounded by young people. When I walked away for a moment into the kitchen, I didn't hear the announcer say that the armed man had been shot dead. It was then that my son, Nidal, came to kiss me and said, "Blessed be the martyr Mohammed." I answered, "God is great." And I thanked him for this gift and prayed that he accept my son's soul.
The law in Israel says that when a suicide bomber dies within Israel proper, his or her body is never returned to the family. It is buried in an unmarked grave in a cemetery somewhere in the north of the country. Only when the suicide bomber dies, either in the West Bank or Gaza, is the body returned to the family. The story of Nidal is different than the other women who choose to die in the name of Allah. By helping her son Mahmoud die, she became a pioneer. But even before her son killed himself, Nidal was already deeply involved. When Mahmoud was only 7, she hid a leader of Hamas in her house for more than a year. When the Israelis finally killed him in her garden, Mahmoud, without fear, covered the militant's body with his own. She remembers that even then her son swore revenge.
I cry every day. I weep, but I bear the pain. I am a mountain of sadness. Even the tears I weep for my son are not enough. I accept the misfortunes of life to be rewarded in the hereafter. I can vouch for my son's happiness. And because I love him more than myself, I drove him to martyrdom. Whether it be this son or my other children, I will give them all to God. I will sacrifice them to liberate Palestine.
When her son told her that he wanted to become a martyr, Nidal decided to disobey her husband, who was against it. For her, it was her moment of liberation. For the first time in her life, she had made a decision that went against her husband's wishes and against the imposing laws of Israeli occupation. It is almost impossible to imagine the life of an average Palestinian who lives under Israeli occupation, waiting for hours at checkpoints while soldiers search and question, being detained, unable to get to work, or watching helplessly as a friend or relative is humiliated, makes even the most passive individual enraged. For young boys, the reaction can be even more violent. Retaliation can often mean that they volunteer to become suicide bombers.
To be able to have that courage to sacrifice yourself for the rest of your community is highly respected in this culture and in Islam. So you have this kind of intense feeling of despair, the need to liberate yourself. To reach that, you have to sacrifice. And you work with yourself as an individual, and as a culture, that sacrifice is the way out. Sacrifice is the way for liberation. And that affects people very strongly now, particularly because of the continuous brutal humiliation by the Israeli occupation forces. You bring in such a very inhuman environment the worst inhuman reaction of people. Do you think the Palestinian children need to be incited? When your house is destroyed in Rafah, what incitement you need? When your future is destroyed for normal life, I mean, you don't have here at all. People are suffocated. This is the real incitement, the occupation with all its details, and they just gave up. And as simple as that, the question lies here. Is there is anything to lose?
A hospital in Gaza. When Palestinian children are wounded and traumatized, their first reaction, even under those circumstances, is to become a martyr for Palestine. Mothers who stand vigil at their bedside are quick to say that they hope the next time their child will wake up in paradise and not in a hospital bed. In Jenin, the daughters of those women wounded during this latest intifada are even more determined to become martyrs, to take revenge against the enemy who caused their parent to suffer.
Enough of being cowardly and failing to do our duty to Palestine. The Arab armies who watch the events here on television without lifting a finger while pretending to uphold the cause of Palestinian women are nothing but cowards.
The physical proximity of Palestinians and Israelis often means that their lives and their deaths are linked for eternity, regardless of the religious or idealistic rationale that separates the two societies. Mothers grieve for their children, children for their parents, and the process continues, tragically reproducing itself time and time again. Abigail Levy, an Israeli mother, lost her only daughter in a suicide attack in Jerusalem.
It was the night I couldn't sleep. That night I was afraid. I don't know, I never scared before at night. I went to sleep, everything was okay, but that night I couldn't sleep. It was rainy, the weather was very bad. And for the half an hour that I slept, I had a dream that I am in the United States alone. No kids, no Rachel with me. I woke up at like 12 o'clock and she was in the kitchen drinking her tea, and she said, well, Mom, the house is clean, we don't have nothing to do. On Friday we used to wake up very early, me and Rachel, this was our day. I told her that I don't feel like going out nowhere, I want to stay home and that's it. And she said, I don't want to eat chicken tonight, because usually on Friday we eat the chicken on the stove. I said, okay, if you want to eat fish, we have to go shopping. It was like 1:20, something like that, 1:20. Around like 5 minutes before 2 o'clock, I heard the noise of the ambulance. I didn't hear the bomb, nothing. And from the beginning, I knew that something happened to my daughter. I have something here. The police talked to me over there in the area and they said, listen, we don't have no bodies. We have only the guard and the bomber, the suicide bomber. We don't have no one else. I'm sure that they have a wrong ID with the suicide bomber, because I heard that the suicide bomber is 16 and a half. For sure, they think that Rachel, my Rachel, is the suicide bomber, because she is 17 and a half, she is very small, and maybe they have a wrong ID. What happened over there, what they thinking were that she came the same time that the suicide bomber came, and they went inside together to the super. And people, eyewitnesses, that they were there, and they say that she looked like her, and they were sure that they was two sisters that came shopping together. The policemen say they looked the same. The other lady was beautiful too. She was with the same hair like Rachel, the same age, the same eyes. Dark skin. My Rachel was dark skin too. And he said this was the situation. We were sure that they were together.
Throughout her childhood, Ayat El-Akraz heard stories that her father worked for an Israeli construction company. At the beginning of this intifada, he was accused of being a collaborator. One of the leaders of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade came to Ayat and told her that the only way to save her father's life was for her to die a martyr's death. Mohammed El-Akraz and his wife Kandra are still in shock over their loss.
See, she'd bought chocolate for the journey into death, to martyrdom. But it was the mosque of Al-Aqsa which called her, and the crimes of Sharon which drove her to it. How can a young girl who buys chocolate and carries the Quran around in her satchel become a terrorist? Terrorists are those who have no cause. She wanted to get married, and we were making preparations. But martyrdom was better for her, God be praised. She was very happy about her wedding. We were in the middle of preparing it. She was so happy.
She had a computer and an email for communicating. She was always among the first in her class. She was a respectful and pious fiancée. And she always had the Quran in her satchel.
She was tormented by the conditions under which her people have to live. We were all surprised. We'd prepared the meal and we were waiting for her. On Fridays, we like to gather to eat together. It came as a surprise to everyone. We were all in shock. Her brothers were crying. I fainted, and when I came to, I had IVs all over me. Death is easier to bear than this life we have to live.
What can you say to Ayat's mother, the suicide bomber?
I don't know what to tell her. I hope that she didn't know.
I swear I was sad. I felt sorry for her. I'm a mother just like her. We both educated our daughters. A mother is always a mother. I feel sorrow and sadness for her daughter, and my heart goes out for her. They are the ones who occupied Palestine. It was they who made that choice.
We can live together. We don't have no borders, nothing. We are brothers. We can live together. You come to the people that didn't do nothing. Okay, you come to my home and you kill me. Rachel was all my life. I mean, all my life was Rachel.
Mahane Yehuda, a large open market in the heart of West Jerusalem. On April 12, 2002, Andalib Suleiman, 21 years old, blew herself up several feet from the entrance. Andalib had gone to pay her respects to Ayat al-Akras's family. There, she was approached by a member of the Fatah organization. Fascinated by the adoration that Ayat and Wafa received after their deaths, Andalib was a willing recruit.
My name is Andalib Suleiman Takatka. I'm 21 years old. I will turn my body to dust to burn all my enemies.
Andalib was not the only one to die during that attack. 6 Israelis lost their lives and 50 more were wounded. The majority of the wounded were transported to Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem.
I saw the terrorist. She laughed. Then she turned around, and I turned as well. And I heard the bomb go off. I was thrown 25 feet in the air, and I landed on a candy cask.
The bomb went off at 4:15. It's terrible. Look what's left of his jacket.
We work as a team. We don't make the difference who is the patient. Okay? If there's a Palestinian patient who arrives and needs emergency service, those who are on call that day will take care of him. The moment the patient enters the doors of the hospital, he's being taken and he will get the best care we can provide him. We don't care who's a Jew, who's an Arab. Obviously, sometimes if it's terrorists, and it happens that we have real terrorists here that we know have done terrible things, it causes some tensions.
There is, of course, the majority of people, I think, on both sides, want to live in peace and security and in dignity, and don't want to have hope.
A culture of death is suffocating an entire generation of Palestinians. To invoke the name of Allah, to talk of anger, despair, and hopelessness, to explain why men, and now women, choose to die and kill others, is still murder. No excuse imaginable can ever console the families who have lost a loved one. Even more cynical is when religious or political leaders convince a young girl or woman that by strapping on an explosive belt, she will achieve equality or rehabilitate either herself or a male family member.
We want a new definition and the redefinition of Islam that can take our children with hope into a new life. We want Muslim lyrics and teachers and imams to give our children a dose of hope for the future, not to have a dose of despair. We want them to redefine Islam in the context of humanity.
قررت
I decided to be the second woman martyr, to follow the path opened up by the martyr Wafa Idris. I give the gift of my person to the Lord All-Powerful, that it may be sanctified to avenge the death of our brother martyrs, to avenge the rape of our homes and our mosques. And as body and spirit, all we possess, I offer them up to Allah.
She called us on the phone from where she was. She was at a checkpoint. She asked me to forgive her for having gone out for the first time without telling us where she was going. I said to her, "Dear daughter, do not break my heart. Return."
On February 27, 2002, Doreen Abu Aisha, a brilliant student at Al Najjar University in Nablus, blew herself up at the Maccabim checkpoint near Jerusalem. Depressed because she was being forced into an arranged marriage, Doreen decided to become Allah's bride rather than disgracing her family.
She asked me to keep the faith. I have 7 other girls and 2 boys. 4 are married. My son Tawfiq is married too. Now I'm left with 3 girls and my youngest son Fal at home.
I feel sadness because we've lost a sister. Yet at the same time, it gives us pride to have a martyr in the family. Our homeland is precious to us.
Even if my imagination is fired by the idea of carrying out an attack, and I'm tempted to do it, I just look at my parents and I hold back because I know they couldn't relive the trauma of losing another child.
لمن وضع حزاما ناسفا على نفسه أو على أبنائه ودخل في أعماق اليهود وقال الله أكبر.
We have just one Islam. You should know that Islamic regime much better than democratic regime. Islam ordered us to be just with our enemies.
What is happening is that the extremists on both sides are taking over life and death.
The real tragedy is that today, Palestinian children are condemned to a life without hope and the promise of a future filled with dignity and joy, but only if they die and wake up in paradise. For Palestinian women, the reality is perhaps even more tragic, creating social conditions that force them to pay a heavy moral price for their slightest transgression, forcing mothers to rejoice in the loss of a child, rewarding relatives of suicide bombers, and depriving children of a future are all examples of a shameless immorality within any society. In the end, for those grieving families and friends on both sides of the conflict, and for those women who have been duped into believing that finally by dying and becoming a shaida, they are equal to men, the language of justification is the ultimate insult.
When this one grows up, no Jew will be spared.